second class for April is here, and I'm so excited. Last class where we focused on some acrylic paints and using different varieties. This time we're going to work on some watercolor products, different kinds and different water-soluble things, specifically watercolor pans and some Stabilos. So we're going to go ahead and start with a piece of watercolor paper. And this time, unlike other art journaling classes, we're actually going to use watercolor paper for watercolor. I also have water in a jar, a big wash brush, some Elmer's glue clear, and some table salt. This is a pan set. And I'm adding water to the pans specifically that I want to use. And I'm keeping it in kind of this like blue purple range, and the reason is I really need highly pigmented colors for this, and we're going to put down some watercolor paint and then use some techniques that's going to take it away. It's very cool. I have wet down my entire page, and now that I have now that the water has had time to soak into my pans a little bit, creating paint because they are dry, I am just sprinkling around and adding some color to the page. And the brush that I'm using is a wash brush. It has a lot of bristles on it. It's big, it's wide. You could also use a mop brush, which resembles a mop like you would use in your kitchen floor. The old kinds with the big bristles on the end. And I'm just adding in some colors and keeping in mind Roy G. Biv because I don't want to add the wrong color to the wrong area and get mud. But I'm sprinkling in a little bit of the color too. It's important to know that I think it's important that I say I take a lot of classes from other people as well. I don't know everything, and I'm always picking up different techniques and tips from different people. Right now I am sprinkling some table salt onto the paint while it's still wet. It has started to dry in some areas, but as long as you work kind of quick, everything will be fine. Now my glue, this part kind of irritated me a little bit. I was testing the technique a few days before this, and I apparently left my glue open. I had to clean it out to get it to work. But now I am drizzling the clear glue down on top of the wet paint and the table salt, and you can see where it starts to disperse the color, the pigment. So the reason I said in the beginning that you needed highly pigmented paints is because you need the color to move. And if it's a pastel color, then it's not going to move as much. So I did the table salt, and now I'm doing the glue, and you'll see how these end up working together. Because my page was wet with water, when I add the glue, it also helps the glue disperse a little bit, and I don't get this big glossy kind of blob where I put the glue. The thicker the glue, the longer it will take to dry, of course, and the more glossy globby it will be when you're done. And that can be really great for certain techniques. But because I wanted to continue to stamp on top of this, then I tried not to do that so much. I also am, you can see, flicking some extra paint that was left inside my brush, flicking that on top of the page. And then I could see there's like this big puddle of paint at the top. It was very, very pretty. And so I dropped some glue into that. And then I'm just heat drying it. And I do heat dry it most of the way, but there is going to be a jump in the video here where I do just let it sit on its own overnight to make sure everything is dry. And we couldn't do that in art journaling, but we still did okay if you just want to keep heating it with the gun, and then you can move on to the next portion. Okay? And here we are the next day, and you can see everything's dry, and it is a little bit glossy where some of that glue has dried, but it's really fine. And the salt is dry. Everything is dried, so I can rub the salt off to get rid of the texture. And now, here you can see the glue and the salt and how all this like really plays together with those pretty colors that we had going on. And it's just a really great like textured background. Now I'm getting out a brush. Oh, see, here's one that I was practicing on. Yeah, and it just depends on what kind of a look you're going for and which colors you choose and how much glue you put down. This is a piece of paper from an old atlas that I bought like 5 years ago in a Goodwill. And this part comes from the longitude latitude index in the back. And I just have tons of it, and I use it all the time. It's so great. It's kind of like book paper, but it's more white, and then it's like rows and rows and rows of names and numbers. It's very cool. I'm just cutting some scallops out by hand, and I'm using my Tim Holtz scissors, but it's just paper, so you can use any scissors you want. And in class, I suggested to everyone, hand cut your scallops and save that extra piece at the bottom too. But you could die cut them if you want, but what I told the girls in art journaling was, if you're having kind of a rough day, you might make like long, skinny scallops. And if you're having kind of a laid back, cool day, you might make like short, fat scallops. And in the end, this is an art journal. So, you know, the more you do by hand and kind of keep your feelings in your journal. I want you to see I was cleaning my brush on that. It was a piece of muslin right there, and I picked this tip up off a bunch of videos I've been watching or whatever I've been classes I've been taking, and you can just add paint to your, not add paint, but you can use your muslin to sop up paint, and then when it's like all bright and fun, you can make other projects out of it. I just added some gesso to my little paint palette here, which I love to recycle, you guys. Actually, my paint palette is just a piece of plastic out of a TV dinner. It's so perfect, and I saved some of them for art journaling and stuff. What I'm doing now, so I've taken my gesso, and remember in the last video I mentioned that it was a heavier gesso? Well, now I wanted it to be more thin and to run, so I added some water and mixed it together. And it's important to remember that I did not seal my watercolor background. So if my watercolor background gets wet, it will start to run. And now I have scraped some of that watery gesso on the top. I really wanted my background to be flowy and to kind of look like it was raining and puddly in the background. So I watered down the gesso, I put it along the top, and then I squirt it with a bottle to get it to run even more. And I do really like the effect. We didn't actually do this in art journaling class because I wasn't sure that it made that big of a difference. It is a very cool technique, but I think it might work better on a darker background in the long run. It's still a cool technique. I want you to see it, and I didn't cut it out of the video. But once it dries, you'll see how much it actually disappears in the background. And oh, and I was measuring my scallops because my scallops are almost done. So I was measuring them to see exactly where they would go. There, I'm kind of sopping up some stuff with the muslin again, but I was measuring the scallops to see exactly where they were going to end up and to make sure that the border at the top was going past the scallops. But like I said, once it dried, it really didn't make that big of a difference. And so I mean, it's up to you. I'm showing it to you, and you can certainly do it if you like, just to see how it turns out on your page. And heat dry, and heat dry, and heat dry. And now I am getting out, it's called a Stabilo Marks All, and it's, oh, well, excuse me. Apparently I'm gluing down my scallops before I work on top of them. This is Yoo-Hoo glue, and it's pretty new to me. Like before, I would have just used double-sided tape or maybe staples or stitching or something, and I can still do that on top of the Yoo-Hoo. But I just got these sticks I picked them up at Dick Blick, but I got them because quite a few other mixed media artists have been using them, and I really wanted to try them out. They're good. They're not amazing as far as I'm concerned, but they certainly are quick and they get the job done immediately, you know, where other glues have to dry or stitching, you have to get your machine out if you don't have it readily available. And it was good. I'm not saying yay or nay. I do have two of them, and they'll be really handy to grab. And once they dry, they do seem very permanent, so that's really nice too. And I did trim the edges off because I do have plans to put this in a journal, and I didn't want anything hanging outside the edge. So I just used the edge of my paper as a guide to trim down the scallops. And yes, now I'm getting out my Stabilo Marksol, and it says on it that you can use it on china, glass, metal, plastic, and paper. And the really great thing about it is that it's water soluble. So we did the pan watercolors in the background. And I do want to say about watercolors, they also come in wet tubes, and then there's all kinds of variations of pans, okay? And so just because it's more expensive doesn't mean you'll like it the best. Maybe you like the colors in something else. We tested all kinds of versions in art journaling, and in my mixed media guide, eventually I will get to watercolors. But here you can see, after I kind of drew in some scallops and kind of rounded edges on top of my book paper, my atlas paper, I drew with the Stabilo. Now I'm taking a water pen and I'm giving it some pretty good flow and keeping the bristles, flat against the paper so that when I activate the Stabilo, which is water soluble, then it flows out into my area and it's more of a gradient, flows out onto the inside. And then just going to heat that like everything else, keep everything dry and working together. And see, now in the background you can see there's not a ton of that white gesso that I did. And here's my fine liner again, and I'm drawing some borders and doing a little bit of journaling across the along the edge. Border, 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 and some of it I'm doing like a line, and some of it I'm doing little dots, and I actually get a little bit crazy in one area, but that's all right. Gosh, I gotta quit working off camera so much. I'm so sorry about that. There, now you can see. And if you get a fine liner, you'll definitely, the more you use it, the more you'll get used to it. And I have two sizes of fine liner, and then inside both of them is the carbon black golden fluid acrylic, and then half airbrush medium. So and I keep those basically full because I use them all the time, and as soon as they're empty or close to empty, then I just refill them. And here, if you did watch last month's videos, I was talking about you can use it to splatter. Here's that, and they're just these like fine little adorable tiny little spots or splatches, or however you want to say it. And after those are dry, I'm going to create some circles on my page, and this time I'm doing it with gesso. Where last month I did it with acrylic paint, this time I'm going in with gesso, which is different than acrylic paint. It's plaster based with glue, and so it has a much toothier. It's the commercial. Excuse me there. Last month I used acrylic paint, and this month, or last video, I used acrylic paint, and then this video I'm using gesso. And gesso is plaster and glue. It's not even acrylic paint, but it's a base, a medium, and it has lots of tooth to it, lots of grit. So it's a completely different feel than acrylic paint, and certainly way different than the watercolor paint that we worked with in the background. Now, I've got out some brand new Viva Las Vegas stamps, rubber stamps. This one is designed by Mary Vogel-Lozenak, and it's this very cool, like, God, she's just this, like, voluptuous, gorgeous, naked gal, and she doesn't have arms. Her arms are up with her hair, and which is turning into these branches and tree leaves, and it's so great. Anyways, I meant to stamp her a little bit further to the center, not quite so left, but it's okay. In the end, it does turn out fine. I was just trying to avoid that really cool spot where I dumped the glue in, and that really vibrant watercolor paint that was back there. I've got my fine liner back out, and I'm drawing some circles around the big gesso circles that I already did. And it is important to remember this right here. They're very fine. It's a fine liner. It's a 20 gauge tube, like a needle or an earring or a wire. And I clogged it with the gesso. So you have to go with the grain, and you have to move your paper. You can't scrape it. It has to flow out. Okay? So that's kind of important. And then I did draw some like little kind of just blobby circles. They're not polka dots or anything, but just to add some texture in there a little bit. And it's kind of similar to the paint marker that I used in the previous lesson for April. And I had this idea to kind of extend out her hair, and then it's fine. I didn't love it, but it's there and it's done. And it's important too to remember that that stuff happens a lot. Now I've just got some plain cardstock, and these are all the new stamps from Viva Las Vegas stamps that I just got just a couple weeks ago. I mean, literally like maybe 9 days, so it's not even a full 2 weeks. But I designed a bunch of sayings, a bunch of sentiments, inspirational sentiments for for a lady or whoever, a young girl or a woman, and then some butterfly wings and a couple other things. And I also did this big bell jar. But what I'm going to do now is stamp the sentiments out on some white cardstock. And you can see here that our rubber stamps, you can get them unmounted, clean cushioned, or wood mounted. And these are my clean cushioned ones. And they're so new I haven't even taken the paper backing off of all of them. But now that's done, and I'll put them on an acrylic block and stamp them out, and then trim it out with scissors so that I have these little sayings to work with. And so I have she was, she lived, she spread her wings, and her wings were made of bold patterns and bright colors, or bright colors and bold patterns. Something along those lines. And I'm going to stamp my bell jar now. And with this part, usually I would mask off the portion that I didn't want to show. I thought that she fit inside just perfectly, and she would have if I had masked. So it does seem a little bit off. Oh, and you saw me straightening out my paper. The great thing about watercolor paper, even though it starts to ripple when it gets wet, because of the way it's been treated, it dries flat. And so then you can, if it's still a little curved, you can just flatten it out by bending it the opposite way. And these are some new grungy butterfly wings, and I'm putting them on my girl. And I'm really accentuating her hips here and making them come off her like gorgeous, voluptuous hips. And now I've got like this little butterfly tree, gorgeous specimen inside my bell jar. And originally, I had thought that this was all I was going to do. So I was kind of contemplating there and trying to figure it out. And I take up some time by trimming out my words. Oh, and I do have a piece of newsprint in the background. I'm using it as underpaper. It doesn't work very well for really wet things like this necessarily, but I am glad I had it there because it sopped up some extra color. But the newsprint is to have as underpaper. You can use it in a later project just like that muslin. Now I'm just going to work on trimming my words up and kind of placing them and figuring out exactly where I want them. Looks good to me. And see here, like I could have picked up that Yoo-hoo stick again, but I just picked up the diamond glaze, and it's not, it's not, or that might be crystal lacquer actually. It's not a yes or a no thing. It's just whatever is really quick by my hand, and now I will have to wait a couple minutes while this dries, but it's not that big of a deal to me. It's all adhesive at this point, especially when it comes to wet adhesive. And originally, and I don't even know why I say originally because I kind of just go with it usually, but I thought that this is where I would be done and it's just her. But then it felt very heavy the wrong way with her and the bell jar down there. And I was trying to figure it out, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And I don't know, it just seemed a little weird. Oh, and I spilled the salt. So here's a good lesson. Always put the cap back on your salt. back on anything, right? The seed beads or even buttons sometimes if you have a lot of buttons in a big jar. And I'm digging around in stamps right now. I don't usually do that on screen, but I'm looking for one of the new stamps that we got. It's these like weeds. They're kind of like daisies, and here they are here, and they're very silhouette-y, shadowy, and very, very cool. And I love stamps like this that you can stamp over and over, and they're not going to look like they're repetitive. So I stamp it once, and I'm stamping it off the page. Stamp it once, I get to stamp it twice, and now it's just looking like full flowers. And then I go to the other side, you could see I tilted it to the right a bit, and then back to the left. And that just helps it so that it's not, so that they're not all coming in exactly the same way, and it's not too repetitive in the exact same placement. And that is our final page today. And here now you can see a few close-ups. And as always, thank you so much for joining us, joining me, and join our Facebook group where everyone's sharing things. And May's coming up really soon, so we'll have that up ASAP. You can buy March's videos, and now you've watched April's videos. And yeah, thank you.